Hello, and welcome to the RPE Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Connor, and I'll be joined regularly by Steve and Dan. The RPE Podcast is a podcast where two physiotherapists and a strength coach sit down and talk all things rehabilitation and sports medicine in the musculoskeletal setting. This show is for all healthcare providers, including new and experienced strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, and also students of any allied health profession who are interested in rehab and management of athletes and the general population. On the show, we aim to try and make sense of all of the evidence and present it in a way that's easy and practical to understand, that also tries to bridge the gaps in each of our respective knowledge bases. We hope you enjoy the format, and we will regularly have guests on to help us explain the fundamentals and also the nuance surrounding program and coaching. We enjoy staying up to date with the evidence, and as a result, we find new information all the time that we will look to pass on to you. One last thing, the views and opinions on this show are our own and should not be taken as healthcare advice. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hi guys, and welcome to our first episode of the RPE Podcast. So it's a rehab, perform and excel podcast. My name's Steve. We have Dan and Connor joining me. Going to be co-hosting this the whole way through. So basically, we've designed this to put together a good resource for strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, anyone working in like athlete rehab, and newer clinicians as well, looking to work in athlete rehab and general populations. So as it said, we're going to be discussing this first series is the programming series. So we're going to be discussing all of the theory and application around programming through the whole gamut from straight from injury through to high performance and excelling in whatever your sport is. So a quick little start about us. So as I said, my name is Stephen Collins. I'm now a physiotherapist. Previously, I was a strength and conditioning coach. So I've got my ASCA level 2 there. So I've been working mostly in rugby league and squash are my main kind of sports that I've worked with, but quite a few individual athletes and a bit of weightlifting stuff as well as my, I guess, area that I enjoy. And I'm also a academic at the Australian Catholic University, so help teaching in the clinical exercise prescription subject there. So kind of do this basically as a job. So yes, it's something that's a very big passion of mine, and I want to get the good information out there, and that's why I've got these two very capable men here with me. So Dan, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Dan Exintaris. I'm a strength conditioning coach. Did my level 2 with Steve. Mainly, a sport that I've mainly been involved with is rugby league for the past, it was about 5 or 6 years, ranging from under 20s into the Holden Cup, and then I did a couple of years at Queensland Cup level and as a strength coach, and then now I'm sort of as a facility designer at PLAE, just looking after all the high performance centres in elite sport, designing those and with 3D modelling and visual representation now. So yeah,
good mix. And you've always been a mentor of mine that I've chatted shop with a lot. So I know you're a good thinker in this field. So yeah, definitely going to be interesting to hear your takes on lots of different things. And Connor, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, about your like journey and why you're here?
Yep. Okay. My name's Connor Parke. I work as a physiotherapist in a private practice in Tassie. Originally, straight out of school, went into uni and did physiotherapy, and that's where I met Steve. We did 4 years together there, and obviously learned a lot from him and a few of his mentors as well, and got me pretty interested in strength and conditioning, but also just sports physiotherapy in general, just seeing how it all kind of molded together. Personally, I'm interested in tennis and soccer, and that's kind of where I hope to maybe get in the future. But I think Steve having me on here was just to try and, from a new grad level, try and relate to some people who are pretty new to the profession or don't know how to quite program or do effective exercise prescription. So I'm probably going to have a lot of questions for you guys, which is which is good for me to learn on.
That's good. Definitely always been a critical mind, as well as, which has been good. So held you in very good stead with learning kind of this stuff and applying it. And so you're going to be very valuable. So I think the first thing that we're going to be having a chat about was the stress recovery adaptation kind of cycle, because this kind of, I guess, outlines the whole how and why you program. Kind of all programming philosophies, everything kind of comes from this old stress research, which is, I guess, adapted and evolved ever since Hans Selye back in the day. So now it's a lot more complex than that. I was just going to quickly share up a little screen that shows, I guess, a good picture of that in a second. But if someone wants to kind of, maybe Dan, do you want to talk through your understanding of the SRA cycle, how it kind of works, and I'll bring up the picture.
Yeah, that's as you said, it's just a principle that underpins all things in performance and rehab and programming, and basically tells us how we want to get from applying a stress to getting the adaptation that we're after.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things with this that I guess people need to understand is, because our job generally is to apply a physical stress, but I guess we always have to understand with whoever it is that we're dealing with, there's all these other things that go into the actual magnitude of the stress that is applied. So I think this graph kind of outlines things quite well, where you kind of, that mechanical stress, you can see that's a bit of a smaller arrow. So this is from John Kiley's research on, I guess he's a little bit critical of the traditional kind of periodization models, which we'll talk about a little bit later down the track. But I mean, this is from one of his articles, and basically it just shows that you've got a mechanical stress coming in, but depending on all these other factors here, and there's many more as well, you kind of get a different sized actual kind of adaptation. It's not always going to be to the exact magnitude of that mechanical stress. So there's always other things that play a part of that. So anyone have any other kind of big takeaways on that right now?
I think this is a good diagram to show what programming is. It's part science, it's part art. So that middle portion of that graph shows where the art comes in. You have to know your athlete or know your client to understand how they react to certain things that are going on in their life. So you might have a program for that day, and there's things for whatever reason come on, and you have to adapt that so they still get some sort of adaptation. It might not be to the script that you wanted, but you still have to adjust on the fly. And I think this is a really good sort of visual to see all the things that go on outside of the sets and reps that you program.
Yeah, 100%. Connor, do you have a take on actually kind of outlining what stress is, what recovery is, what adaptation is, kind of why does this matter? What are we actually trying to kind of achieve?
Yeah, okay. So I think stress in general can be, like you said, mechanical, psycho-emotional, psychological in general. If someone's got a busy period at work, if someone's uncertain with finances, all those little things can add extra stress. And if we as therapists add more stress to that, then potentially that's more stress than someone can recover from. So it's important that we know, yes, we're putting physical stress on, but there's all these other factors that can accumulate the overall stress. It's also important to know if those things are potentially a barrier to recovery. If, for instance, even with chronic conditions, if there's a lot of these things going on, it can take even longer to recover just because their body's kind of not switched into that recovery mode. So yeah, I think understanding all of the different components that can contribute to stress as a whole is really important for recovery, and then obviously that adaptation you want afterwards as well.
Talking recovery, what are your big go-tos, Dan? What's I'm going to guess see massage gun, foam rolling. No, what's your big go?
Bone broth is one.
Yeah, exactly.
I
You've just triggered like half the people out there in the fitness realm.
I'll do that from time to time.
Good.
I think my main principle is you can't sort of outrun the program. So if you can do all the recovery modalities you want, if your programming is poor and you have too much mechanical stress or too much volume or too much load, you'll never be able to recover. So I think that's got to underpin everything. And then from there, you do
I'm
all
going
the
to share
stuff.
up a different screen actually while we do this, because I think this one might actually, while you talk through. But yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, and I was just saying all the stuff that's free, that's the best recovery tool. So sleep's the greatest recovery tool you can probably get.
Yep.
A lot of people undercook it. And then your hydration is also big player in that, and then your nutrition, obviously. But I think outside of all that, I still think your programming needs to be sufficient before you.
100%. So like I did this up. So last night I was invited down to just do a bit of a masterclass on injury not prevention, risk minimization and kind of pain inactive populations. And I kind of did up this little diagram to them to kind of explain this cycle. So as we've been talking about on this top left, your stress recovery adaptation, I got up the bar, the horizontal one is like your tissue capacity. So for any tissue in your body, or even we've got to think systemic capacity as well. For the capacity of the whole organism that you're trying to train, I guess it's going to have a current.
Sorry to interrupt, Steve. I haven't got that. I haven't got the thing up on mine. I don't know if that's an error with my screen share. Do you have it, Dan?
No. Is it you got a new one up?
Okay, just wait. I'll just stop the share and I'll bring it up again. Is that better?
Yep, that's better.
Yep, awesome, cool. So yeah, in that top left, as I said, you got like a bar graph, and on the horizontal axis, you got like your tissue capacity there. And as I was saying, any tissue or the system, because later on when we talk injury, I think it's really important to remember that we're not just rehabbing a specific tissue, we're rehabbing a system. And if that system, if you've got 3 limbs that now you're taking out a third of the loading that you used to give it, you don't want to detrain that whole system by a third as well. So you got to kind of find that in other places. So it's important to remember, but for make it easy, I put tissue capacity there. And then it has a current baseline. You apply a stress, your tissue capacity, while you're initially kind of just finished applying a stress. Obviously, everything's not completely linear. This is just trying to make it easy, but it goes down a little bit. Then through good recovery, as you said, like not crappy programming being number 1, but number 2, kind of sleep, nutrition, hydration, all that type of stuff. It brings it up with the hope that our next kind of time that we get into our workout being very simplistic, obviously not taking into account like overreaching, all those type of things, but being very simplistic. The next time that we come into a workout, our tissues are at a higher capacity. They've adapted positively to the stress that we've applied because they've recovered. But then it shows, I guess, that you got the stress up. You think that you've applied that nice small stress, but actually because it goes into this cycle of basically being a human. So life happens, you got emotions, you got work, you got other physical things that you're doing during the day. If you don't have some way to kind of regulate that stress up, if you're kind of stuck to a bit of a stringent program, as Dan said, poor programming can accidentally make what shouldn't have been too much of a stress really, really big, which can then bring you down to this bottom left-hand side where you've thought that you've applied that same stress as above, but you've pushed yourself down near kind of tissue capacity, injury, pain, and you're either going to need a lot longer to recover or you're going to be starting at a worse point than what you thought. Or over here, I've also got, like if you just got crappy recovery. So if your recovery due to poor sleep, poor nutrition, not eating enough, not resting enough, not relaxing enough, not foam rolling enough, not enough bone broth, all that type of stuff. It's going to, that's another sarcastic bit, obviously. Your recovery is less, and so therefore you've applied your workout. This bottom right graph, you've applied your workout, but then you haven't recovered enough, and you've applied another workout, and again, you've adapted negatively downwards. So anyone got any big kind of takes away on that, or the whole SRA stuff before we kind of move on?
I've kind of got a question, just based on how you select your stress to start with. What kind of things do you see as important to get, like day one? Someone comes in either as a performance athlete or with an injury. How do you know that the stress that you're applying isn't going to be too much for them to handle on day one?
Dan, do you want to go for that?
You don't really, but you need to have some level start, some start, and then you adapt as you go. So when I say poor programming, I don't mean in a sense whatever you've written down is bad, because I don't think anything's bad, but rigid programming that doesn't change based on what you see or what the athlete tells you. I think that's where I think it comes in, because I was always of the opinion that the athlete knows what it feels like more than I do.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll let them tell me that was too much. And then sometimes you get some guys, and you know some athletes, some will be sort of taking it for a ride, but you do know, or you let them dictate how much is too much. And if I see too much technical breakdown, then that's when I'll know, okay, it's probably a little bit too much, or they're not ready for that quite yet. Yeah. So I don't think you really know at the start, but you have a good guess, and then you adapt from there. Some guys you'll hit the mark. Some guys will be too much. Some guys will be not, or some athletes will be not enough. So you're really dependent.
And I reckon this plays really well into like things that we're going to talk about later on. So I reckon you have your general gross, I guess, principles of programming that we kind of know on average works for the mean of people. So if you're looking so I think we're going to talk is next intensity, I think that we're going to talk about. So I know that we have it kind of really leads well into that type of stuff down there, the actual specific thing, or frequency. So with frequency, that Brad Schoenfeld. So we will share a link for all of these articles and podcasts that we reference throughout the time. But that systematic review kind of recently was saying my take on it anyway, is that basically kind of 2 to 3 times a week for strength gains is going to be basically kind of where you want to be. Anyone else, that's not a bad starting point kind of thing? If you're going, how often kind of should I be applying this stress if I'm trying to get my person generally stronger? So what's your take on that from that article, guys? Anything in particular?
I think twice is if they've come from a one times background, I think you go to twice is a great starting point. Run that for as long as I think, or milk that for as long as possible, and then you might add in the third frequency, depending on how fast they're adapting.
And then again, we got intensity, and we have some basic exercise science principles to kind of start with, I kind of believe, which again, if you're looking at that Schoenfeld's systematic review, for me, my take on it is, well, it depends on if I have a performance athlete or if I have a kind of a general population, how I describe it. So basically, general population, I say you've got to go hard enough that realistically, you only got a couple of reps left in the tank and you've done less than 30 reps. That's going to be the intensity. For a general population, that's going to be a decent place to start. You want them to go close enough to muscular failure. That's for like more hypertrophy kind of work. Whereas if you're going up in that strength stuff, again, you're going to tell them, I want you to be, couple of reps shy of failure, but you're going to be working more in that kind of less than 15 reps type of thing. And that's for very general population, very general prescription, but not a bad place to start for most people. And I believe that's kind of backed mostly by the evidence. And then obviously we can go more, he went more into percentage-based stuff in that article as well. So I said, less than 60%, you got to take pretty much close to failure for hypertrophy. It was, I think, 60 to 80% was his best there for strength. Although the most important thing out of that, though, was when tested for a specific strength, kind of, if you were testing on a specific protocol, like a 1RM squat, then the difference came. But if you were just testing them in something that took zero skill, the people kind of, as long as they both put on muscle, which they both did, because you're working close enough to failure, then that's kind of the biggest thing that's going to improve strength, because obviously strength is a skill thing as well. Does that make sense? And my take on kind of that research kind of resonate with most people?
Yeah, I think the hypertrophy side of things, a larger cross-sectional area has more capacity for the strength, and then as you're starting to go up in percentages or intensity, that skill level, that skill development or skill acquisition becomes more important to express that strength. So good starting point for Gen Pop, I think. Or even if the training age of a pro athlete or an athlete, they might be very, very good athletes, but they're very, very poor trainers.
Yeah.
So there might be a 10-year veteran on the field, but you might class them as a 2 or 3 year in the gym, and you have to prescribe your protocols accordingly, I think.
And then once having kind of, as I say, you start exactly as you said, Dan. I do the exact same thing. So I use those rough kind of what the evidence bases us on, what works for the mean as a rough starting point for most people. And then very much you just see how they responded and adapt your programming as you go. So I really like using RPE-based stuff for that, but we'll talk that later because sometimes it can get some criticism.
Is that what a lot of people want to know, Connor, in the university setting? Is that covered a lot or no?
I think with uni, especially when you're first coming out, you're a bit like, the first job of physiotherapy is to do no more harm than what you're trying to get out. So I think one of the biggest things that we have to manage is that stress that you're actually putting on your client firstly. And if we have a good way to measure that, then that's pretty much what we want to know. So essentially from that, we've got, if they're new to training, which most Gen Pop probably are, then you probably don't want to do them any more than 2 intense sessions a week. And you're looking, based on that article as well, at what, like Steve said, kind of 2 or 3 reps in reserve. And you're only doing that twice a week, and that should be enough stress for them to get an adaptation, but hopefully not enough to break them down as well.
You get that done with a yellow TheraBand?
Sorry?
You get that done with a yellow TheraBand by your side?
It depends what you're loading. Shoulder, if it's really, really painful and you've got to start, if you can't even start heavy loading, then why not? But if you're looking to get strength, probably not.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. Did you want to chat a bit about this envelope of function, Connor? Like we've kind of gone a bit further into the SRA cycle and actually looking at the components that go into building stress. Do you want to kind of go back and have a little bit of a chat over? Because I really found this interesting when I first heard of it, because it's kind of coming from the physio side of things, but it's applied so well into how you actually make an elite athlete better. because you just have to improve their envelope of function. So you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, cool. I'll share the article that I've got. So originally the envelope of function, hang on, I'll just share my screen. Share. Cool, so I'll just make this big screen. Yep, you've got that there?
Yep.
So the envelope of function was originally described by Scott Dye, and it was a knee. It was based on the knee. And essentially, he went through the fact that the envelope of function is essentially what the knee is ready to do. And he thought that not only the knee will have an envelope of function, but everything will have an envelope of function. It will have a certain amount of load that it's ready to carry, and it will have, and that will respond with a certain amount of frequency as well. So if we look down here, this graph kind of really puts it together really well. And you could think about this is for the knee, for example, but you could think about it as skin, you could think about it as bone, you could think about it more broadly as a hamstring or anything like that. But I'll just zoom in on this one, sorry. Cool, so you've got load on the y-axis and frequency on the x-axis. So this is essentially what the knee's ready to take. So anything below this line is good, the knee's happy with it. So a jump from 2 meters height, 2 hours basketball, a certain load and a certain frequency, the knee's going to cope with. However, we know that if we apply too much stress, like up here, the jump from 3 meters height, the knee's probably not going to cope with that, and that's where it's going to potentially break down.
Load?
Yeah, too much load in a short amount of time. Likewise, if you've got too much load over a longer period of time, the frequency is increased. If we take this jump and we make it more frequent, say somewhere along here on the graph, so you're doing 15 maximal jumps, something like that, probably not 15, probably more. But if you're doing it every day, again and again and again, that's when you might expect some breakdown there as well. So
awesome.
I think this applies really closely with your SRA cycle, because the graph here. So
it helps answer your question of realistically, back to the how do you know how much load they can handle. Usually there's, in both physiotherapy, in strength and conditioning, and exercise physiology, in sports coaching, there's some sort of objective measure, data, testing, usually as you see an athlete, even if your testing is actually just applying your first stimulus and seeing how they respond. So some people do that, it's not I have dabbled in that from time to time. It's not what I do all the time. Sometimes with my clients though, not my athletes, but sometimes with my general pop, that is exactly my first real knowledge of what they're going to deal with. But so usually there'll be some sort of way to gauge what this envelope of function is, or what their kind of tolerance is.
Exactly. For instance, if we use the knee as an example again, like a lot of people who have anterior knee pain or patellofemoral knee pain hate going downstairs, and that's a fair bit of force on the knee. And if you've had an insult to your knee and your envelope of function is dropped, it might have been down in this zone of homeostasis before, but now it's above that, either in the zone of overload or structural failure, and that's why people are getting pain. So I think this graph here really highlights how important it is to see what their current zone of homeostasis is before you put too much stress on it. So we do that with the subjective as well. Hurts to go up and down stairs, etc., etc. So that's probably just outside it at the moment. And then from there, we can see what they're going to take and slowly work their envelope of function up.
Well, what does that look like to you, Dan? That the supra physiologic kind of overload thing, basically we're starting to get into how the early models of periodization of your stress kind of thing, of to be okay, you throw a little bit of stuff up in this supra physiologic kind of area, but then give it the time to kind of bounce back and adapt, and that's how you're going to push that envelope a little bit higher. That's kind of what I see when I see that.
Yeah, I do as well. I was just saying, I also think, and I'm not going to fire shots, but I think this is probably a great graph to show why things like the CrossFits, the big group trainings where they do a lot very early on without the capacity.
Yep.
And so I think there's actually a really good graph to show why there's a lot of tissue and structural breakdown so early on with that sort of exercise and programming. So that was my first thought. But then you've got obviously skilled trainers where you do need to get into that super physiologic sort of zone, not for long, and then allow recovery, and then have another bout, and then allow recovery. As long as it's systematic, it's not random. That'd be the caveat.
So how do you make it systematic for you? So do you, to apply the extra stress, okay, are you going, let's use volume? Are you increasing volume? Are you increasing frequency? Are you increasing intensity? What to you is the best and safest way, and what do you feel that the evidence kind of guides is the best and safest way to increase the volume? Or that's giving my bias already away, but increase the stress in a way that you're going to be able to push into that super physiologic part, come back down, and just slowly build that envelope of function or their tissue tolerance, or whatever we want to call it.
I guess it depends on if I'm talking sports prep. It's what they've been prepared for. So at the start of your pre-season, they haven't been prepared for anything. Mm-hmm. So I'll try and go a more volume-based approach, where I might add a rep every week to a set number, like a number of sets. So it might be 4 sets of 6, 4 sets of 7, 4 sets of 8.
Yep.
Let's repeat, and then I might do that, and then that just allows me to build up volume, build up skill, without the worrying need of adding weight to the bar every time.
Yep, that's my kind of bias based on like my understanding of the evidence as far as to how to increase someone's capacity is they just have to be able to tolerate more over time. So the best way to kind of, obviously you got the 2 things that can, well, you got 3 things that can, but the ones I guess that can do it the easiest, increasing the amount of volume someone can tolerate is a really good place to start. Once you've kind of got that in a session, you really can't pack in any more volume that you believe, or that the objective markers, because realistically we always got to be testing back to objective markers to make sure that the tolerance isn't dropping. But once you've kind of loaded that volume up to as high as you feel, or that the tests show you, then you can kind of tinker around with frequency, and then for me intensity as just a general development block kind of thing I'm talking here, more so than kind of going for any peak performance. But just building an athlete, or building a general pop, or building a rehab program over time, I'm wanting to build that person's, the amount of stuff that they can tolerate. So yeah, evidence to me is in favor of increasing volume, then kind of frequency of the stimulus that you apply, and if the tissue then needs, obviously, to go through an intensity cycle as well.
Yeah, I think the frequency is guided by how much volume you're doing. I think, as you said, you don't want to overload one session with too much volume, so you may need to split that into split that across 2 sessions. Yeah. So I usually cap my sessions, or cap what I want out of them. So after a certain period, it's either boredom sets in, unless obviously you're a barbell sport athlete where that's just your thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, boredom will set in. Then that they'll sort of not be taking any note about what they're doing. So yeah, you might just chop it down, cover it over 2 or 3 sessions, and try and increase it.
Yeah, that's right. That's how both the evidence and experience has kind of showed me the best way to improve someone for a long-term, building a long-term trajectory of their capacity. Tinkering with intensities as required, and if the rehab requires it, so say like ACLs or calf strains where they need to get back to producing explosive forces, well then obviously we have to do that. But again, you introduce that at a low volume, then you build the volume of that up kind of thing. So you never kind of, so the big thing I guess that we've got to get across to everyone is both the evidence kind of says, and probably, I don't know, I've made this experience when I was a lot sillier at the start, but you can't really tinker with everything at once and expect a really good result, or to know what was the thing that kind of stuffed up the most. So, you don't want to be, if you're adding an intensity in, you don't add the intensity in at that same volume and frequency that they were doing before, because you're very likely going to be running close to that, their capacity, their envelope of function, and you don't want to be doing that for too long.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to see where you pitch something each session as well. For instance, from a physio perspective, if someone is ready to do a certain amount and they're coping really well with their session, you're ready to push it up. You don't want to change too many variables at once, because if they do flare up, or if they do respond poorly to training, or if they're having a very hard time recovering, you don't know if it's the intensity, the volume, the frequency. You don't know if it's the exercise they're doing. If you add in a certain exercise, you don't know which one has resulted in this outcome. So I think that's really important, to not change too many things at once.
I think we'll probably cover this in a couple more episodes, but this is all emerging strategies. So this is exactly what the basis of bottom up. Is it bottom up or top down? Bottom up programming.
Bottom up.
Yeah. Bottom up programming is all about. You reduce the noise, and you'll be able to address what stress caused what adaptation.
Yeah, 100%. I reckon we got a lot of stuff that we can, like our next one, we're really going to start talking about. So we've laid out some general principles. We haven't really gone as deep into them, things like how we would say intensity was where we were up to, but I think maybe it might be best to cover as the start of our next one is to the little bit of the evidence on that, and then our experience of using it, and we'll talk that RPE, how a way to make sure that we regulate the stress, because we might just quickly count the start of our next conversation in this, that like obviously there are ways that you can have a better idea of what the person's stress recovery adaptation, the intended, or making sure that you are applying the intended magnitude that you wanted to apply to either the tissue or the person or whatever. And personally, I think some of the best ways are like auto-regulated ways. So whether you're reps in reserve or an RPE kind of person, but something that kind of just allows the person themselves to, I guess, every input of that person's life is going to regulate how hard, how much weight's on the bar that day, how many jumps they do that day, how hard, how high, all that type of stuff. So do we agree that we want to kind of maybe start next week, chat on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to start. It's a good topic.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Because yeah, I think it's a good way to wrap up that kind of we've outlaid the importance of the stress recovery adaptation cycle. But yeah, we won't leave you guys kind of thinking that, well, how do we actually make sure that we don't bugger this up too bad? So yeah, we'll talk RPE a lot more, or auto regulation a lot more next time, so that way you guys know how to actually make sure that you're getting the correct training stressor that you're wanting to get.
Very good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me for the first podcast, and you'll be joining us every week onwards. So
it was good.
Thanks for having me.
A bit of fun.
No dramas. So yeah, you can find me at The Joint, Dan at PLAE, and Connor at PhysioTas.
Cool.
Until
Good
next
chat,
time,
boys.
guys. We'll see you later.
See you next week.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay, so just going to wrap up episode 1 now. We got through quite a bit tonight. We started out with the stress recovery adaptation cycle and outlined the different components. We talked about stress and how it is not only the physical stress we put on clients, but the other things that may add to it, such as emotional stress, lack of sleep, and fear, just to name a few.
We also outlined the importance of taking note of these things and the importance of getting to know the people that we work with. Dan then mentioned a couple of pearls about recovery and that the things that are free are our best option and we should be putting the most emphasis on sleep, hydration and nutrition. Other things such as massage guns, foam rollers, etc. are better used as adjuncts to these main things. We then mentioned the adaptation part of the cycle and how the adaptation you get from a single stimulus will be different for everyone, so it's important to be adaptable with your programming. We talked about a couple of training principles as well, those being frequency and intensity. We came to the conclusion that for someone starting out, 2 hard sessions a week should be good to start to allow for recovery, but also sufficient stimulus. And that stimulus should be somewhere around RPE 7 to 8 or working to 2 or 3 reps in reserve. We're going to dive more into some other training principles next week, as there are a couple of topics we could talk through for a whole episode on their own. We also chatted about the envelope of function, which stated that system or a tissue will have a certain capacity to a certain load. And then in order to improve the envelope of function for that tissue, we have to work in the supraphysiological zone without overreaching into the zone of breakdown. We mentioned that you don't know if something will be too much for someone day one, so again, it's important to be flexible with your programming.
So there you have it. Episode 1 of the RPE Podcast. Thanks again for joining us. If you like our content, please leave us a like or a rating, as it helps drive traffic to our work. We have left links to all of the resources mentioned in the description below. If you are watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below, or if you would like to get in contact with us, we will leave our email addresses in the description below as well. See you next time on the RPE Podcast, where hopefully you're ready to grind out another RPE 10 show.